Hello, so today we're just going to do a quick little overview of some of the features of attribute tables and a little bit about queries and a brief bit about joins. This is just going to kind of allow you to orient yourself to what some of these features look like when you're dealing with them in ArcMap. So let's get started here. Chapter 2, by the way. So this week's focus is mainly on attribute tables and what we can do with them. And as I said last week in chapter 1, attributes are the why behind the geospatial data. So it's non-geospatial data, but it's what gives that geospatial data its meaning and makes it meaty and analyzable. So your attribute tables are very important, very powerful, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with what is called spatial analysis, broadly speaking. And I mentioned that a bit in the introduction to the week. This idea of spatial analysis is a very general concept for most everything we do in GIS. It is analysis of the spatial dimension, and we do that by manipulating the attribute table data. So just to familiarize yourself with what you're going to see when you open your attribute table, which, if you recall, you will right-click on your layer, select Open Attributes, and this table will pop up at the bottom of your screen. It will look like this, generally speaking. Of course, it will vary depending on what kind of data you actually have in your map. But in this case, we are looking at looks like counties in Alabama. So on this slide, I just wanted to highlight very basic. These are called records, the lines, individual lines going across. So these are going to correspond to whatever geometry is being used in that layer. In this case, it's more than likely polygons that represent each county. And they'll each get their own separate line. And then you have going down on the columns are the fields. And the fields are the different kinds of information that we have available for each record. So in this case, we have the name of the county, the state name, the population per square mile, etc., etc. So the next thing you'll see on your attribute table are the table options up in the upper left with that little caret arrow that comes down. You're going to open that up and find additional things that you can do to your attribute table, which we'll go into in a moment. This one to the right of it, related tables. If there's anything you've joined to it, you'll be able to see it there or switch it around. And over here we have our selection tools, which is select by attribute and select by location. These are things you can also get to through table options, but there's a quick select here. And then down here, we have table tabs. As you're going through your map, and if you have multiple layers, as you open them up, they will technically stay open and just kind of layer themselves like they would in an Excel spreadsheet with little tabs down here at the bottom, so you can navigate between all your layers. Go to specific record. As you can see up here, everything in this case says object ID. You can actually find a specific object ID if you type it in there, and you can scroll through with that button. These two are very important here. I mean, not very important, but they can be helpful shortcuts. Show all records versus show selected records. If you were to click on one line, and I'll show this will actually be more clear on the next slide, this particular county, in this case, we've moved on to a different slide, but these are also counties in Ohio, I believe. It'll highlight that one county on the map if you select one line. Now, if you wanted to, say, for instance, select all counties that started with the letter M, let's say, and you did a query for that, and it highlighted, let's just say, for instance, 8 counties start with the letter M. All 8 of those counties would be highlighted on the map, and they would be highlighted on here in blue. And show all records would show all the highlighted ones plus all the non-highlighted ones. Whereas if you show selected records, it'll just show you the highlighted ones, just show you a short list of the 8 highlights. And then here you can see a count of the selected records. So oftentimes our attribute tables will have hundreds of lines of information on it, so it can be helpful to see actually how many have been selected, because you can't actually see the whole table at once. So a little bit more, I was talking about when you select a single line, it'll show you on the map exactly what it's talking about. So here it is. On this map of the United States, California is highlighted, that one record, and it corresponds, correspondingly highlights the state of California in cyan. This can be helpful if you are just wanting to explore your map, or you're looking for individual things that you don't know quite where they're at. You can just kind of go through and click on different things and see where they're at on the map. Likewise, if you were to click on this little square here, this column here on the left, where I say click here, that actually opens up a few other options as well, where you can add fields. Remember, these fields are these columns. So if you were, we'll be doing this more as we move along through the semester, but you will be adding fields to add additional data to your map, and you can do that by clicking on that little left square there. And of course, you can always sort your data by clicking on the top, and that is also something we'll be doing a bit more. So briefly, we'll talk about what a join is. A join is just basically taking two similar elements, two different attribute tables, and using that as your key to join the data. So in this case, this if we look at this user interface right here where it says join data, we're using this attribute table here on the left as our source, and then we're joining it to the one on the right. And we're using this county FP to join it with the county on this one. And even though the field names are identical, the numbers, the data within it is the same, meaning there's an identical match for each number going across. So that means the data in this table will get joined to this table, and it'll result in this, which is literally just the tables kind of being brought together, which means you can then do further in-depth analysis. So there are different kinds of joins. There's one to many, many to many. These start getting a little more advanced, and it goes into it a little bit in the book, but just know that this is essentially what a join is doing, is bringing the data of two different attribute tables together. So let's talk quickly about SQL. I always shorten it to call it SQL, but it's called Structured Query Language. You'll be using it a lot as you go through and doing your various labs and analyses. It might sound a little confusing, but it's really not. It's actually quite interesting. I think it's kind of fun to work with. It's basically building word problems, word equations, using your operators. And how it functions is you have your operators here in the middle, of course, your equals, greater than, less than, greater than equal to, et cetera, like and or not. And then up here you have the field. So it draws the field names from the attribute table that is you are currently working from. And over here you have your values. Your values are the individual records that are represented on the attribute table. So you can build an equation, such as here is a very simple one. So city is a field, it's an up-down column. The equal sign, of course, means like you want it exactly to equal the word Canton. And we know we have Canton on the table because it's in our operators or our value table here. And so when you hit OK, it will highlight it on the map, just like you had selected a record. Of course, that's a very simple way of doing it, but it just gives you an idea of how it works. So here we can look at some more complex SQL or SQL command sentences over here. So remember, we have our field here, we have our values, and we have our operators, and we're building equations here. So this is this attribute table, or this layer, December 10, SV1, population is greater than or equal to 127,500. So that's going to highlight every record where the population is greater than that. So over here, we take that same selection, and on top of that, we're asking for the housing has to be greater than or equal to 100,000. And then so on and so forth. So you can continue to refine based upon your requirements, what you're looking for. So you can do a lot of fun stuff with it, as long as, especially if you're dealing with large amounts of data in your attribute table, it really helps to get to the bottom of what you're looking for. So select by location is also a fun tool, and I don't believe it goes into as much detail in this chapter as it will later on, but this is just a sort of more visual way of seeing how the different layers interact and how you can get the different attributes to select different attributes that you want based upon how the different geometries are working together. So for instance, here's the terminology over here. Intersect, contains, completely contains, contains Clementini, within, completely within, etc. These are all, they apply to specific pictures over here. So I would take a moment to really study this, because it's actually, you'll see this come up in ArcMap, and it's good to have this to refer to. And it's also just another way to sort of for a little brain game to think about how the geometries actually interact, as opposed to using words. But down here you'll come across this drop-down list. It can get a little burdensome to try and read through all of that, so that's an unfortunate, not a great way that the interface works on ArcMap, but these down here do reflect this up here, so take some time to kind of read through and pick which one corresponds with what. So last but not least, just my quick tip for the day: as you're learning to work in ArcMap and you're doing your labs and you're saving your data, save relative path names. That's going to make it a lot easier on you if you happen to move files around, or things get stored in different places than you initially had them when you saved your map. Like clicking on path names, store relative path names, it will always be able to find it no matter where you put it, as long as it's on your hard drive or your computer. So that's it for today. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you're enjoying chapter 2. Thanks.